All these quads here are a 150 size. This is a Blade 150, this is a Blade 150. This one's built out, and this one is mostly for extra parts because I crash a lot. Anyway, this is an ET 150, and you know, if you look at these, like I said in the previous videos, the distance, the way they measure it, is from motor to motor, the center of each motor across the quadcopter. And these are both 150 size, and you can tell here they're about exactly the same, which they should be because they're both 150s. Well, today, instead of a 150 size, I have a 130 size frame. And this is a Deformation 130. And I thought a 130 frame would be a little cooler because I'm having problems with my LKTR 120 because it's so small. So I started looking at the 130s and maybe using bigger motors. Anyway, so this is the main plate. It comes with a motor or a camera mount in the upper plate, and then some spacers here to put it all together. But if we look at this 130 frame versus this 150 frame, you can see that it is significantly shorter, which again, it should be because it's a 130 frame versus a 150 frame. But this thing is really, really small looking, and I think it's going to be a pretty cool quadcopter, depending on how heavy the frame ends up being once it's fully assembled. So I'll go ahead and get it assembled so we can get some measurements off of it. The first problem I'm having with this frame is that these holes aren't actually drilled out the right size for these 2mm screws to go through. These are 1.9, so about 2mm screws. The holes themselves aren't quite big enough for them to slide through. You have to push it in here to get it started. Then you have to put it the rest of the way in with the hex driver. Not that big of a deal, and it does go. They're just a little tight. And the bad thing is that you won't be able to tighten these up from underneath using the screw. You'll have to actually grab something up here and twist this because those screws are in there so tight. So this is a little bit more difficult to put together than I thought it was, only because these holes aren't drilled out on the top plate either. So every screw has to be screwed through the top plate and into the spacer. It's not that big of a deal usually because the spacer is usually the right size and it goes in, which they do on here. The problem is these carbon fiber plates make it difficult to put the screws in. Anyway, on here it comes with two sizes of screws, a thicker one that's down here on the bottom and a thinner one that's up here on the top. And I didn't put this last spacer in just so I could show you this a little bit easier, but the longer screws will help it in the crash. If you have your battery up here, it's a lot of weight, and when it lands, all that weight's going to want to throw forward if you crash nose down, and you need a little bit more strength to help hold these spacers up. Well, you could put the longer ones on top, but I don't think they need it up here quite as bad, just because the plate is thinner, and down here, even though it's going to have a lot more leverage to try to break this bottom plate, so the longer screws will help this thing try to break the bottom plate. But because it's thicker, it should be able to withstand it a little more. Another thing, this carbon fiber camera mount here, it fits in here, and I'm back here on the third little set of holes back. You can put it up here if you want straight, a little bit, or a lot back. And the only problem is that the bottom holes aren't drilled correctly to let this thing lean backward. So you can kind of tell a little bit, but it's kind of bending to the back as it goes around, as it goes from the bottom to the top, because it's so tight in there. And I kind of had to force it in really to get it to go in there. But I'm gonna get this last screw put in, the last spacer, and we'll get this thing measured up. All the screws are 1.5mm hex key screws, so if you have a 1.5mm, you should be good to go. This bottom plate is 2.5mm thick, and this top one is 1mm thick. And the space inside here between these is about 30 millimeters. And that might be a little bit too tall for the components that you use. The nice thing about this frame though is that it has these mounting holes here. So right there, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it can support a full size NAS 32 board in there, or a CC3D board, and it has plenty of room for a power supply also. But I think if you were going to build this, you'd really want to shrink these down to like 20 if you could, and you'd have to buy some new spacers. Maybe the spacer kit from a Blade 200 or Blade 180 kit would actually fit these holes. But you could drop these down to 20 millimeters to make it look a little smaller, because the profile on this looks a little large for a 130 frame. So here's the Deformation 130, and it comes in about 30.9 grams. Now, just for some comparison, here's the ET150. It comes in at 36, so it's quite a bit heavier, you know, quite a bit meaning like 5 grams. And here's the Blade 150. The Blade 150 comes in at well, look at that, right at 30 grams. Now, the problem with this, with the 130, is the 130 is a little bit smaller than the 150, but with the 150 weighing just as much as this 130, I don't know why. I don't know what the advantage would be of going with a 130 over a 150. Unless, of course, you're just trying to get into a 130 class, then this will get you there. But if you're looking at just flying around your neighborhood for no particular reason, then this 150 is really not that bad of a choice, based solely on the weight. With the Deformation 130, this is actually a cool looking frame. I like how they did some, try to make it a little bit unique by putting some curves up here on the top. And they got some of this little extra little cutouts up here around the motors. And I don't think this is going to be too big of a deal. I mean, I worry about that a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be too bad. The main plate, though, being that it's 2.5 millimeters thick, is actually good in the fact that it's not going to break very easily. And also, having this mounting plate here should make it easier to mount the camera. Now, on my Blade 150, what I actually did is I just sandwiched the camera between the upper and lower plates. Yeah, you can kind of see it. Kind of sandwiched it in there, and it worked okay. And it's actually held in with sticky tape on the top and bottom. But this would actually give you a plate to mount to, so you could stick your camera in there and glue it. So that's kind of an advantage for this. The fact that it also has the mounting holes for a Naze 32 board or a CC3D board is also an advantage. It also looks like they were trying to put in some battery straps back here, but those are going to be way too small for any kind of use that I can think of. You got some antenna mounts up here, potential ones, but again, it looks like they may have just taken a larger frame and just tried to shrink it down. Overall, this frame is okay. I like it because it has the stronger main plate, but I don't like it so much as the Blade 150, only because the Blade 150 it weighs about the same. Now, the biggest problem with this is you got these little 1 millimeter plates on here, and these things will break, and I've broken them before. So if you don't crash a lot, this isn't so bad. If you crash a lot, this one actually may be a pretty good frame. Like I said, though, the one thing I would definitely do is shrink these down to 20 millimeter posts. Do away with the camera mount if you're trying to save some weight. And it would look like a cool quadcopter frame, and I think it would run the 3-inch props on it here with no problem at all. To show you a little bit more about these props, this is a 4-inch, 3.5, and a 3-inch prop. So a 4-inch prop has, you can see here, 0 chance of fitting and spinning on this frame. Here's a 3.5-inch. This is a 35-45, and if I center this over the hole, it's still not quite going to clear the frame. So you're going to have to go down to something like a 3-inch, and a 3-inch prop has no problem clearing the frame. That kind of goes back to what I was saying about this Blade 150. The nice thing about a 150 frame, especially when it weighs the same, is that it can run the 3.5-inch prop just fine on here, and it clears the post. Now you have to be careful because these actually came in 2 sizes, and if you got the earlier one, this is the earliest frame they made. It actually cannot run the 3.5-inch props. You have to run 3-inch props on this. But their later ones, the ones you can probably buy now, they all can fit the 3.5-inch props. So the Blade 130, I like its size real well. I like the fact that it's small, and even comparing it here to the 150, like I did before, you can see here it's just a lot shorter. So this should have a little bit easier time getting around and flying through stuff. But the weight of it and the size of motors that it runs, if you're trying to go for speed or agility, I think a 150 may be a better choice. If you're trying to get into a 130 class for a race or for your friends building one, then the 130 is not a bad frame. And I don't mean to make this sound like it's a bad frame, because it's really not. It's just heavy for what it is, especially compared to a 150. Anyway, that's the Deformation 130. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comments and I'll try to help you out as best I can. And as always, thanks for watching.